There's a specific kind of man who disappears after he fails. Not for a weekend, for months. He doesn't rage, he doesn't post about it, he doesn't ask anyone for help, he just goes quiet and something behind his eyes goes still. Most people call that depression, or ego, or a man who can't handle losing. Psychology calls it something else entirely. Because what you're watching isn't a man breaking down. It's a man taking his entire identity apart on purpose, down to the frame, to find out which piece lied to him. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happens inside an INTJ after everything they built collapses. Why the silence is the work, and why the man who comes back out is almost never the same man who went in. Every culture has this man. The strategist who bet everything on a plan he was certain about and watched it fail anyway. The founder whose company died, the academic whose thesis fell apart, the man who spent 9 years building a life with someone who left in a single afternoon. You know him by what he does next. He cancels things, he answers texts 3 days late, politely, with no explanation. He starts reading again, not fiction, but something dense and old, something with rules in it. And he sits in one chair for hours doing what looks like nothing. Carl Jung had a name for this stretch. He called it the confrontation with the shadow. The point where the story you tell about yourself stops matching the evidence, and something underneath demands to be dealt with. For the INTJ personality type, that confrontation has a particular shape. Their whole sense of self is built on a model of how the world works. So, when the world proves the model wrong, they don't just lose the outcome, they lose the map. We're going to walk through 7 stages of what psychologists would recognize as identity reconstruction. The Stoic pivot. How INTJs take a systematic failure and turn it into a rebuilt self. Let's start with the part that surprises almost everyone. The silence isn't grief. It's an audit. When most people fail, they process it emotionally first. They talk. They vent. They look for comfort. And comfort helps them recover. That's real, and it works. For them, the INTJ runs a different sequence. Jung described their dominant function as introverted intuition, a mind that works by building one deep internal model of reality and testing everything against it. When that model produces a wrong answer, the INTJ doesn't want sympathy. Sympathy doesn't fix a model. He wants to find the faulty assumption. So he goes quiet, and he goes back through it. Every decision, every branch, every moment he saw the warning and reasoned it away. It looks like a man sinking. It's closer to a man reading his own black box recorder. So if you've watched someone you care about vanish into himself after a loss and thought he'd given up, consider that he might be the only person in the room actually doing the work. But the audit is just the surface. What it turns up is where this gets serious. Here's what the audit keeps finding. The failure wasn't in the plan. It was in the man. Psychologists call this the difference between a global and a specific attribution. Martin Seligman's research on explanatory style found that when people explain a setback, they either localize it, that approach was wrong, or they globalize it, I am wrong. Globalizers take far longer to recover, and they take far more damage on the way. The INTJ has a specific vulnerability here. His self-worth was never built on being liked, or being good, or being lucky. It was built on being right. On seeing further than the room. Competence isn't one of his traits. It's the load-bearing wall. So when the prediction fails, the crack doesn't stay in the prediction. It runs straight into the foundation. That's why he can lose a business and act like he lost a limb. Everyone around him sees a bad quarter. He sees evidence against the one thing he thought was reliable about himself. Now, here's where it gets more complicated, because this is the part even the man himself usually can't name. He isn't mourning what he lost. He's mourning a future he'd already moved into. Introverted intuition doesn't just plan. It projects. The INTJ has been living inside a detailed version of 10 years from now for a long time. He's furnished it. He knows what the mornings feel like there. Researchers who study future-oriented thinking call this episodic future thinking, and there's evidence that vividly simulated futures get encoded almost like memories. Read that again. Almost like memories. So when the plan dies, it doesn't register as a disappointment. It registers as a bereavement. He is grieving a life he genuinely experienced that never technically happened. That's why there'll be other opportunities bounces off him so hard. You're offering him a replacement for something you think was a hope. To him, you're offering a replacement for somewhere he used to live. And this next one, almost everyone close to him gets it completely wrong. From the outside, he looks fine. That's the problem. He's articulate about the failure. He can explain what went wrong with unnerving clarity, no self-pity, no drama. So people relax. They say he's handling it well. They stop checking. But psychology has a name for the gap between what someone reports and what's actually happening inside them. Alexithymia describes difficulty identifying and naming emotional states. And while it isn't an INTJ trait, the pattern rhymes. He can describe the situation flawlessly and describe himself not at all. Understanding an emotion analytically is not the same as processing it. He has performed insight, not recovery. Here's the tell. Ask him what happened, and you'll get 20 minutes. Ask him how he is, and you'll get one word. The clarity you're hearing isn't proof he's okay. It's the last system still running. If you're the kind of person who notices this, who hears a man explain his own collapse in perfect paragraphs and thinks, wait, that's not the same as being all right. That tells me something about you. It would mean a lot if you hit subscribe. We put out videos like this every week. Real psychology, explained in a way that actually makes sense for real people. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. He rebuilds alone, and whatever he decides in there becomes law. There's a real phenomenon behind this. Tedeschi and Calhoun's work on post-traumatic growth shows that people can come out of a collapse stronger, wiser, more focused on what actually matters. It's genuine. INTJs are unusually good at it. But their research also found the growth depends on a step INTJs skip disclosure. Talking it through with someone, testing your new conclusions out loud on a person who isn't you. An INTJ conducts the whole trial in one room alone with himself as prosecutor, defense, and judge. And a mind that clever will build a flawless case for almost anything. That's how a man walks into a failure, hurt, and walks out with a beautifully reasoned rule like depend on no one. Carved in, cited, closed for appeal. He didn't get bitter, he got convinced. Those are much harder to undo because nobody was there to say, that's grief talking, not logic. But this is the root underneath all of it. Ask where the rule came from, and you almost always land in the same place. Long before the failure, usually before he was 12. Attachment researchers following John Bowlby's work describe how children build an internal working model, a set of expectations about what makes people stay. Most kids learn that being loved is enough. Some learn something narrower. The pattern INTJs describe over and over is a childhood where being useful worked, where the room got warmer when he was capable, sharp, ahead, not cruelty, often not even intended. Just a house where competence was the currency that reliably bought approval. So he grew up understanding a bargain nobody said out loud. Be right and you're safe. Be right and you're wanted. Now hold that next to the failure. He isn't just a man whose plan collapsed. He's a boy who was wrong in a house where being wrong was expensive. That's why the shutdown goes so deep and lasts so long. He isn't defending a project. He's defending the only deal he was ever offered, which brings us to the last one. And honestly, the most important. Here's the turn. The INTJs who come back, really come back, all make the same move. They stop trying to be right and start trying to be responsive. The Stoics named this 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, born a slave in the Roman Empire, built an entire philosophy on one distinction. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Our judgments and our actions are ours. Outcomes, other people, and the world are not. For most people, that's a comforting quote. For an INTJ, it's a structural repair, because his identity was mounted on the one bracket that was never load-bearing. Outcomes. The pivot is moving it onto the part that actually holds the quality of his reasoning, the honesty of his effort, the way he responds when the model breaks. And here's what makes it more than philosophy. Carol Dweck's research on mindset found that when people define themselves by a fixed capability, failure becomes a verdict on who they are. When they define themselves by a process, the exact same failure becomes information. Same man, same wreckage, two completely different meanings. The INTJ who makes that pivot doesn't lose his edge. He loses his brittleness. He can be wrong now without being demolished. And that is the first time in his life his intelligence is actually free to work. So the next time a man like this goes quiet after everything falls apart, you know what you're actually watching. You're watching someone take apart the only structure that ever made him feel safe, alone, with no guarantee he can put it back. You're watching a man who learned as a child that being right was the price of being kept, discovering at 35 that the price was never real. And you're watching him, if he's lucky, build a self that doesn't require the world to cooperate in order to stand. He isn't cold, he isn't gone, he's rebuilding from the frame, and it's slow because he's doing it properly. If there's a man like this in your life, you can't do the rebuild for him. But you can be the person who asks how he is and then doesn't leave when the answer takes a while. That's the disclosure step he would never ask for. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between growth and a beautifully reasoned wall. And if this man is you, the audit is not the end of you. It's the last thing the old version does before the new one gets to speak. If you want to go deeper on how this mind actually works underneath all of it, I put together a video on the INTJ's inner world that I think will hit just as hard. It's right here when you're ready.